Okay, so Brad Templeton is the chairman of the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He has been in the computing world for a very, very long time, and also slightly infamous for actually having created and proposed the .com domain while at Sun. And a bit of a little living legend, and weirdly enough, he and I lived on the same street at university in 1984 or 85, I think. So, Brad.
So I've been told that you want me just to talk and for you not to have any questions, so we will go straight without any questions. No, actually feel free to direct and learn about the things you want to learn about here. We've got two big topics to cover. One, computer security, which is what was originally on the schedule, and I'll give you some grounding in that. And the other one, privacy in the future and where technology is going to take us and how it affects society, which is actually what I deal with more, and so we'll have more fun with, and so we'll try not to spend too much of our time on the security issues. But if you tell me that you want to go in certain directions, please do, and we will move in those directions. Computer security, or I call it computer insecurity because mostly that's all anyone talks about is when it breaks down, tends to suck. It's actually amazing, nonetheless, in spite of how insecure our computers are, that everything, by and large, works. I mean, it's just because most people are pretty decent. The real danger of this is a phenomenon I call the automation of good and evil, which is computers automate things. And when you can automate good things like publishing and reaching the world, that's great. And when you can automate bad things, one evil person can multiply their effect. And that's where the dangers come from computer issues. When people talk about computer security, just to give you some basic grounding course, one of the phrases you'll hear a lot is the threat model. And it's if you're trying to design how to make anything secure, you first have to decide what's attacking it. What's your model? What's your view of what is attacking you or what is going to attack you? And it's important that this be realistic. Because what often happens and what actually makes security fail is people have the wrong idea of the threat. They either overestimate it or underestimate it. They design their computer system to be secure against the NSA attacking, and they make it hard to use, and so no one uses it. Or they design it with no security at all, and then the little children in Eastern Europe can come in and attack it. In particular, the biggest mistake that's going on I call the firewall hoax. How many of you know what a firewall is? See, now, you may not actually, because there are programs on your PC that call themselves firewalls. But firewalls in the old security parlance was an idea of trying to build a wall around your city, around your company, your institution, so that you could have people who were trusted inside and people who were not trusted outside, and you'd put a little box in between the outside world and your world, and it would make sure that no bad people got in. So the problem is, of course, that people take their notebook computers out and they go outside the wall, they go into Starbucks, they go into various other places and use them where they're not protected by the wall. And if those computers aren't safe and protected, someone gets into them and then they take the computer and they bring it back inside the wall where it's now trusted. It's one of the people who's been let in the gate, and it can be suborned to be a zombie, be under someone else's control. So the thing that many people now call a firewall, this little program on your computer, making your computer itself secure, actually is the only real course to computer security. But since we have this problem, this monoculture problem I'm going to tell you about, we do the firewalls. Computer security people sell the firewalls even though they know they're a hoax because people will pay money for them, and they do something. Now, why is there a danger from monoculture? Monoculture is a term from farming, where you have too many farms growing the same crop, and if there's a blight disease that comes into the crops, it kills everyone. It wipes out all the farms at once, and it's a danger to have a monoculture. But we have that in computing, not in this room where I see a lot of glowing little apples shining at me, but unfortunately in the rest of the world. Microsoft, of course, controls a fairly large percentage, about 80–85% of the workstation computers out there and notebooks, and Apple controls another 10%, and Linux is on a couple of percent. When you have one company, one system dominating so much, you create an attractive target. Every system has vulnerabilities. I'm generating a little feedback there. I don't know if you want to adjust that. Every system has vulnerabilities, and every system, but the big system is the attractive target. So if you can find a hole in Windows, or as I like to say, if you can find a window in Windows, it's just a proposal I made. Why do we call them holes? That we should call them a window. And the plural is left as an exercise to the reader. But if you find that kind of vulnerability, then you can suddenly take over 85% of the computers in the world, or the ones that haven't been updated. And this is a danger. It's a hard danger to fix. But we have this monoculture right now, and even if we all ran Linux, it wouldn't be better because people would find problems in Linux, even though it's probably a bit more secure than Windows. People would still find it. Bruce Schneier, who is actually one of the people you should most read in the computer security world, is wrong about one thing, which is that he thinks that the answer to this is product liability, because that is the answer that is used in a lot of other fields, that the company that makes the software that's insecure should face liability for it. And the problem with that is that with computer intrusions, everything happens all at once. If I make a bad product, a few of them break, and I have to pay liability fees on the few that break. They don't all break simultaneously. And if everything breaks simultaneously, it's just not something you can insure against. It's not something that a company can withstand. You have to find other ways around it, which we haven't yet found. So one of the things the monoculture has brought us is botnets. And the botnet numbers are absolutely staggering. Many people calculate that perhaps 30% of all the personal computers in the world are botted. Now what that means is that somebody has managed to break into them somehow, getting them to run some bad executable off of a website, sometimes occasionally browser vulnerabilities, of just some way they have found a way into the computer. Now when a computer is botted, it's also called a zombie. It tries to act pretty much like an ordinary computer, but it's also secretly joining anonymous IRC chat rooms and so on without you knowing it, waiting for commands from its zombie master. The zombie masters may control hundreds of thousands, even millions of computers who are all sitting there waiting for commands. Now, right now, they don't do anything too nefarious with this. The two main things they do with it are send spam. As I say, with 30% of the computers infected, look to the guy on your right, look to the guy on the left. If it isn't one of them, it's you. All right? Your computer is out there spamming people all day. Now, that is what's happening to a lot of people. And spam, as much as we hate it, is fairly innocuous to some of the things that could be done. One of the things that is also commonly done is called a denial of service attack, particularly a distributed denial of service attack. Now, what that means is you don't actually have to find what would normally be considered a way to break into a computer to hurt it. Now, the old days, computer break-in, you actually got control of the computer, you could turn it into a bot. You could do nasty things, you could look at everyone's files. But another way you can do damage to a computer is just by overloading it so much through its normal official channels, the way it's supposed to. If it's a web server, it's kind of sitting there. Its job is to answer web requests and show you web pages. If you can overload it with too many requests for web pages, you can shut it down as effectively as if you had the off switch in your hands or if you could break into it. So if you can control 1 million computers, you can call up a casino in Aruba, an online casino, and say, hey, you're making $1 million a day from your online gambling. It'd be a real shame if it just fell down under the load. We wouldn't want that to happen, would it? We can protect you from that. It is very much a classic protection racket. They send in and they control these things. And there have been people who've tried to fight it and even at very high levels had to give in, even with a lot of help. So that's the more nasty thing. I think there's something even nastier. I believe that some of these botnets may actually be run by foreign intelligence services or by domestic intelligence services. Because if children in Eastern Europe can do it, I think the NSA is capable of doing it. I think that MI6 and I think that all these other intelligence agencies, and think about that, forget about listening to people as they talk, which is what these spy agencies like to do, these signals intelligence agencies like to do. Having actual access to hundreds of millions of computers and reading the files on their disks, that's pretty good intelligence. So I can't believe that something so cheap and easy, which has far greater intelligence gathering ability than anything else I've ever seen, hasn't occurred to them. Whether they're doing it or not, they wouldn't do it overtly. They would hire the teenagers in Ukraine or wherever it is that people think is going on. Another thing that has been going on is last week, attacks from North Korea, believe it or not, where websites in South Korea and the United States were shut down by attacks coming from within North Korea. Now, there are people who don't believe it was Kim Jong-il and his government behind it, that it was other people. No one knows the answer to that yet. But this is something that's been seen in armed conflict, occasional additional cyber attacks. So this is something that's going to be happening more in the future. You guys are asking a lot of great questions. I like that. All right. I'll give you another issue. This one ties into something we deal with a lot at the EFF. There is a movement afoot called trusted computing, and it's the idea that you would put hardware to enhance security in personal computers that could allow the securing of what you might call a little walled garden box inside the computer. That software outside of that memory, so you've got one piece of memory which is running special programs, special trusted programs, another piece of memory that is running the ordinary program that you just decided to run yourself. And those programs they've got some kind of physical protection to stop them from accessing what's going on in the inner core. Not just that, this inner core is so strong that even you, the owner of the computer, cannot access what's going on in that core. Only the manufacturer of the computer can actually, who installs it in the first place, has the special passcodes that would allow changes to software inside that core. So that actually is a useful concept for computer security. What people are worried about is, as we put it, this allows Microsoft to trust your computer, not for you to trust the computer. And so one of the applications people have commonly want to do this is to do things like make a movie player for your computer where you cannot access the movie in order to protect digital rights. And I'm not against people who make movies and want to sell their movies and want to protect them, but when you start getting to the point where computers stop becoming general purpose devices and start becoming under the control of other people, it's something that is worth examining. One of the bright lights, I think, although it's still considered a research area, is what's called a capability-based operating system. I'm not going to be able to explain these to you in detail today, but you might want to look into some research into this area. It's a different way of thinking about operating systems and thinking about permissions. Now, as you may know, I don't know whether you use Mac or Windows, most operating systems today, they'll have like a super user, the administrator or the root user, who has all the power. And in the old days on Windows, there wasn't even that. There was just, if you were the user of the computer, you had full power over it. And that meant every time you install a program on your Windows computer, and frankly, even on your Macs today, you're basically trusting that person who wrote that program with your life, right? Because I've got my life on my computer. I've got, all of my account, all of my financial information. You can go into my stockbroker account and transfer all my money. All that information is in my computer, anyone who takes over my computer. So every time you install a program, some cute new program you're trusting that person with your life. That's not a good idea. And so people are working towards operating systems where security is done. So access to anything requires what's called a handle. It's a computer pointer, a fancy computer pointer. And only someone who's been given one of these handles can access something, so you can feel a little safer about allowing a program to run because it just doesn't have the handles to things like the passwords to your bank accounts and so on, which you also keep on your computer. I'm not going to be able to give you a full grounding in that today, but you might want to look into that as terms of what in the future is being thought about in order to improve the security of operating systems. Now, let me give you a little bit of grounding in encryption and where it fails in particular. How many of you know about public key encryption and how it works? So that's a pretty good room. There's a few of you. I'll give you a little. Now, one of the inventors of public encryption.
How many people use it?
You actually all use it.
How many people use PGP?
Use an explicit program like PGP. I'm going to tell you how they all use it in a second, but you've actually used PGP. But anyone else put up their hand, or you all? Yeah, a couple of you. So very roughly, it was a great discovery that came about actually in the secret world a little earlier, but in the 70s in the public world, through some papers by Diffie-Hellman and Merkle. And you've met Merkle. He's not been talking to you about cryptography, but one of Ralph's great early achievements was work on public key cryptography. It changed the way cryptography worked. In the old days, it was pretty much the way you've seen it in spy movies and so on. You'd have a password, and you'd tell the other person the password, and you could both use the same password and send messages to each other, and you used the same password. Public key cryptography was a system where you could communicate with each other with a different password with a very special property. That one could be published to the world and could only be used to encrypt, to encode secret messages. And the other one, which you kept to yourself, was the one that could decode. And that allows anyone in the world to send you a message that is secured, and you're the only one who can read it. And it's kind of like a mailbox slot. Anyone in the world can put mail in the mailbox, but only you have the key to get the mail out of the mailbox. And it has a countervailing system called digital signature, where only you can sign a document, only you can authenticate a document, but anyone in the world can know for sure that you are the one who signed it. And of course what I mean is that the person who knows the secret password is the one who signed it. Because someone could learn your secret password and then pretend to be you, so it's not literally you, but it's as long as you keep that password safe. So anyway, that caused a revolution because it suddenly allowed a solution to this problem of key management. One of the difficulties with the old style, where we both share a password, is you'd have to have a different password for everyone in the world, and there's just no way to coordinate that. And this allowed one password to work for anyone to send you a message, and one password to work for you to sign a message that anyone can verify. This is great, and it works, and we know how, technically, to make these things happen. But they don't happen. Only a few people put up their hands about having used the encrypted program. And that's because people who design crypto systems tend to over-engineer. They tend to sometimes overestimate the threat model, and they don't understand, they're beginning to learn, that there is such a big difference between figuring out the algorithms that are secure and that work, and mathematicians will agree, seem to be fairly strong, and designing a protocol that will actually be used by people. I actually think there have only been 2 successes in designing actively deployed cryptographic protocols to the public. One is Skype. How many of you have used Skype? Okay, so as it turns out, you have used public key encryption. And when Christopher asked you if you had used public key encryption, and only a few put your hands, you were wrong, because you had used it. But Skype encrypts all the phone calls, but you don't know it. It has what I call a ZUI, a zero user interface. Right? And I think ZUI is actually the only way you actually get these things deployed. The other way you've all used public key encryption is if you've ever gone to a web page that has HTTPS in the URL instead of HTTP, and you probably didn't type it, but you were probably directed there, and a little yellow lock appeared in your browser. Again, you were using it, but you only use it, one time in 1,000 when you're typing in your password, or occasionally when you're going to a bank. Just 2 weeks ago, Google finally said you can now use the encrypted browsing protocol for your Gmail. So if you go to Gmail now, go to it with HTTPS, and you will stay in that mode. And someone on this, like on this wireless network we're on, if you're going to your regular Gmail or Yahoo Mail or any of these other ones, I could be on my computer and watch you read your email. And I could see that going on. So yes, Shai.
A lab feature for quite a while that you can access it only as HTTPS by default.
Right.
Go to the regular email.
Yeah, but they're now allowing the regular one to work. And people have resisted it because they thought it was too expensive. There were a lot of different reasons. There were complexities. There are warnings that pop up on browsers when you're not careful. This is a classic problem in security. It's called the alarm that goes off all the time. It's not just in security. It's true in airplane cockpits, too. If you make an alarm that goes off all the time, it becomes an alarm that no one cares about anymore, and you've made your alarm useless. And again, security designers, these are some of the mistakes they make. So another important concept to understand is called the certificate. And I don't know if I have time to really explain how a certificate works, but it's basically this. Once you got this ability to reliably sign a document, digitally sign a document, and what that means is it's a digital document, you perform a complex mathematical function on it that produces a number, which could only come from that document. If you change the document, the number changes. This is called a hash, or specifically a cryptographically strong hash. And if you can have an algorithm that makes that number, and then you can use the digital signature algorithm to sign that number, now if anyone presents another document, they can see it's not the one you made. They can see that only the document you made is the one you signed. So what you can have is you can now have certificate authorities. Now in the old world, a certificate authority was the Department of Motor Vehicles that gave you a driver's license. They were the only ones allowed to make the little card with the photo and the hologram on it and everything. A certificate authority is just a universally trusted company who everyone knows the key of. And they will sign a certificate which says, Brad Templeton's key is this. And we, the certificate authority, verify we met Brad Templeton and we looked at him, we took his DNA and his blood, and whatever it is that they did. And we confirmed it was him, and he told us this is his key, so now we attest to you that that's his key. And you trust them. You trust the way they signed it, and now I can carry the certificate around that proves that I'm me, and everything I sign, you can prove, you can know that this major authority that you trusted met me at some point, confirmed it was me, and it gives you a way to trust a random message that comes from space. So these are worthwhile concepts to understand when you're learning about how that works. Phishing and social engineering. So it turns out a lot of vulnerabilities to security come not because you made a mistake in how you designed your security protocol, not because there was an error in the mathematics of your encryption algorithm. They came because people are easily tricked. And this is what people call social engineering. You call up, one of the classic ones, people have now started getting used to it, is people would call up inside a company and they'd call a random low-level employee who wasn't clued in and say, hi, this is John from the Information Services Department. We had to reset all the passwords. What would you like? Could you tell us what your password was? And people will just say, oh, okay, sure, yeah, it was this. They'll happily do that on the phone. You find the name of one employee and you call and you say you're that person in a big company. These are just some of the easy ways that people get in. People have done amazing things. Women have walked into highly secured, there's this one woman who just thought it was a game to see how many highly secured facilities in Washington could she get into. And she got into all, tons and tons of them. It was years before someone finally caught her that she would sit at a desk and pretend to be working, and if someone questioned her, she would question them back. And people immediately say, oh, they're questioning me. Oh, I better go away. No one says sure of themselves. So this attack is quite powerful, and the way it's being used in the public is something that's called phishing with a PH. And that's For example, you've all got them a letter that pretends to be from your bank. And it says, hi, we're your bank, and your account is expired. Please sign in again and enter your password again. Of course, what they're giving you is a web page. It's not the bank's, but it's theirs, and then you'll enter your password. No matter how good your password's, how strong it is, no matter how many exclamation points and bizarre characters you put into your password, it doesn't matter. Right? You're going to sit and type it to these guys. So that's another thing that breaks security protocols without the mathematics having anything to do with it. I'm going to a little bit talk, well, I don't know if I want to talk about spam because I have a lot of other things I want to cover. I am required to mention, though, that as computers get big, there's a truth from biology that says that every ecology that gets complex eventually acquires parasites. Parasites are actually 70% of the species on the Earth, I believe. So everything in computer ecologies and artificial intelligence and so on is starting to acquire parasites, and people aren't planning for that very well. I want to get into the privacy stuff. Oh, there's an actual question.
Topic, I was wondering if you could explain why it's so difficult to track the origination of cyber attacks in Estonia, Georgia, and the recent one in North Korea.
So you remember the botnet, which has 1 million computers under its control?
Repeat the question.
Oh, sorry. How come they can't track who's doing these cyber attacks? So the botnet that has 1 million computers under its control, so what you do is you connect to one of your little slaves, and then from there you connect to another of your little slaves, and from there you connect to another of your slaves, and so on and so on and so on. And eventually you're going through 100 different things. This is all automated, right? You've got a little program that just does it, boom, 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 boom. But they have to go and they have to find each computer, and then they have to look at that computer and say, okay, where's the traffic coming from? And they have to, it's much harder for them to trace back through that. And eventually they find that 3 days ago you were in an internet cafe in Podunk. And that there's no way of them finding out who you were at that point. Yeah, Luke.
Just to follow up on that. So apparently, some Vietnamese researcher somehow proved that it wasn't North Korea, but it originated in a server in Florida. But who knows who triggered that attack? So.
I mean, this goes on, especially right after the attacks. There will be. Sorry, Chris was going to remind me to repeat that question. He suggests that some recent research says that the Korean attack we talked about from last week might have actually come from Florida, and that some researchers think that's the case. And that could be true. I haven't tracked all the details to know that, but that is something that happens. If the attacker is good, they're good at covering their tracks. And we do find some of them, but the good ones never get found. So, yes?
Follow up to Luke. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Florida because about 50% of the international traffic to the United States actually comes through Miami.
Yeah. So he says half the traffic in the U.S. is coming through Miami, so that may not even be a good estimation of what's going on. Yes, Neil.
Is anybody talking about changing the laws so that white hats could go in and exploit these same deficiencies in Windows and fix your system before the botnets can use them?
It's talked about a lot. I mean, whether or not it makes sense to use the very same security holes to go in, break into other people's computers, and fix them. It's kind of like this joke, about I say that the wood paneling in my family room was installed by vandals. That's what it looks like, but people don't break into your house usually and renovate. But this is what people propose doing, and it basically, it's a giant ethical debate, right? I mean, yes, it would obviously be good, but using the very tools of the bad guys, we could also have armed police on the streets shooting everyone, and that would stop crime. So people aren't ready to take that. Most people aren't. There are people who push for that, but by and large the consensus has been that, there's some other negative consequences of it, and just ethically it's becoming them in order to fight. We've met the enemy and he is us. Salim.
No, I've talked to a few people in this world who are a little alarmist and saying that we're on the verge of the internet becoming essentially useless and completely taken over by these things, and essentially the whole thing's going to collapse. What's your view of that?
I am much more optimistic. In fact, I'm somewhat famous for having parodied that idea in 1989 because it was noticed, because I was one of the first people to say that. I wasn't the only one, but back in 1984, people kept pointing this out to me, saying, you posted this thing saying, oh my God, all the students are going to come on the net and it's going to overload it, and what are we going to do? And I predicted that. It didn't take place, and then every month someone would come up with a prediction that it was all going to collapse under its own weight, and it never would, and that's been going on for 30 years. And so I wrote a history of the net, and after I'd written it, every 10th line I inserted imminent death of the net predicted. And it's just that these predictions are very, now it doesn't mean that finally there isn't one prediction that is the one that goes on. And yes, I wonder why we don't. I mean, maybe the bad guys are still smart enough that they know destroying the ecosystem is not worth their doing. Now, there are bad guys who don't care about that, so that is an issue. Fortunately, they don't seem to be the smart bad guys. So I remain optimistic, but not for a rational reason, just simply because of the trend. In spite of that always having been the case for 30 years, that death was right around the corner. It has not come. And that doesn't mean it couldn't come, but it seems that as an ecosystem, it survives. Just as the parasites, by the way, don't kill us, we co-evolved with them. And we got stronger as they did. Okay, $10. If your phone goes off, it's $10. Okay. Actually, I should put my phone on vibrate before I say that. All right, now I want to talk about privacy, and these are most the futuristic issue. This is Singularity University, so we want to examine, I think, where things are going in the future. I've hopefully given you some background. So I'm going to talk about the value of privacy, why we care about it, because people do debate that, what kind of threats there are, particularly some ones that apply in the United States. And anyway, you're going to get a whole bunch of stuff, and we're not even going to get to all this, because you are going to interrupt me. But let me tell you why privacy is freedom, why it's worth defending. I have what I call my bad science explanations. That if you know what Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is? Most of you have. It's in physics, it refers to the energy and momentum of electrons. So metaphorically, it refers to the idea that if you observe something, you can't avoid changing it. And that's also true with people. A watched populace, as I've been known to say, never boils. It doesn't get to have the thriving stuff at the edges of society, which are always considered a little bit weird, but which are where innovation comes from. It turns out that we are the only, apes and above are the only creatures that actually need privacy. It is a special need to humans. It doesn't chill everything. You know, some people seem to be pretty comfortable with being watched and whatever they're doing. But it does chill enough that I think it's dangerous to have a surveillance society. You don't get the same level of freedom. When you first went home after you went to university and you went home for Thanksgiving and you were with your mother, did you feel as free as you had been at university to say whatever you wanted to say and do whatever you wanted to do? Do you remember the first time you actually swore in front of your mother? Not you. You've been getting porn from your mother. But and you felt weird about it. That's being watched, and it's being watched by someone who loves you the most. So anonymous communication has actually been the foundation of a lot of free societies. And each generation defines its own concepts of privacy. This one is redefining it. But in spite of what some people say, they're not erasing it. So what do I say about bad science? Well, most of you, I hope, have some scientific training or some mathematical training, and you'll know this, but the public doesn't know it. If you look in a big sea of data, and you look hard enough with something in mind, what will you find? The thing you're looking for, whether it's there or not. Right? And scientists are trained, most of them, to understand to understand the difference, to try and repeat experiments, to try and not bias what they're looking for. But nonetheless, even scientists make this mistake. So in a world where there's a tremendous amount of surveillance, tremendous amount of data collected, the danger is that people come in and find things that aren't there because they just had the impression they were there. I'll briefly tell you the story of a Seattle firefighter. His house was burned down. It was arson. It was actually became an attempted murder investigation, because there was someone in the house at the time. They got the guy's Safeway card. Have any of you got these cards from the grocery stores? They looked at all the things he'd bought at Safeway. He had bought the brand of fire starting cube that was used by the arsonist. Well, this is a smoking gun or smoking fire starter cube to the typical jury. And he was ready to go to jail for the rest of his life until they caught the actual arsonist and he confessed. All right? But if you take a long list of everything you bought, something is suspicious. And on its own, you go into in front of a jury and say, look, he bought these cubes a week before the fire. And they say, well, obviously, he's the guy. He burned it down. So this is the thing that makes people understand how juries may not understand the way that scientists are able to understand that. If you don't care about your privacy, the problem is that most people don't care about privacy until after it's been invaded. Basically, it's been discovered. People will trade away almost everything about themselves for the chance to win an iPod. People have done give me your email password. Someone sat in the street and said, give me your email password, I'll give you a raffle ticket for an iPod. And like 30% of people gave working email passwords in exchange for this raffle ticket, which wasn't even going to win the damn thing. So I believe, and I'm going to show you in more detail why, it's important not to even walk on the edge of a police state. It's important to walk fairly far away from it in how you design your society. Another thing is that shy people need to know. Would all the shy people in the room please stand up? All right, you're ruining it for me, Shy. Little pun on your name, now I understand. Okay, fine. But of course, the shy people don't stand up for themselves. But actually, there are a lot of people who, the idea of the world being full of cameras and being watched all the time is psychologically just impossible for them to accept. It's just the way they're made. And a surveillance society, even for people who don't care and say, I've done nothing wrong, what do I have to hide? They're shutting off a large portion of the population of the world. One thing I've been talking about recently, and I want it because it's the new trend in computing, and it's definitely worth understanding, and some people think it's the big ultimate trend in computing. Of course, we've had big ultimate trends in computing many times in the past. It's supposed to be ironic that I say we've had ultimate things many times. Okay, it's too warm out. So this is where you store, not just do computing in the cloud, but store applications in the cloud. How many of you use a webmail? You know, like Gmail, Yahoo Mail, that's okay. So most of the people in the room put up their hands for that. So you're storing all that stuff out in the cloud. You may even be using spreadsheets, word processing. You may be right now in the cloud editing a document about what I'm saying. You know, making snide remarks about me in the cloud. There it is. It's up there on the screen. So that's cloud. Now, I have a diagram to explain how cloud computing works. Basically, what we have is a variety of users. They connect to a central group of servers which are in the middle of the cloud. Now, as you may see, the one user at the bottom may be suffering a bit compared to the other users in this vision of the cloud. Why do I make such a scary picture of cloud computing? There's been a pendulum in computing, actually, and I don't know how many times it's going to swing. But when I was a young lad, we had time sharing. And time sharing was where you had a mainframe computer and everybody had a terminal and they connected to it, or you even had to line up. And when I was in school, we actually lined up and fed punch cards through. That's how old I am. And we switched to having personal computing, these things on your desk where you stored your documents. And now we're shifting actually to something that's kind of like time sharing, but with a new motif, which is that your computer doesn't contain your email anymore. It's sitting on Google's server, and it's out there, and it's kind of like time sharing. So this pendulum has moved back and forth, and there are reasons why it's moved, which I'll get into if you want to ask any questions. But it may swing again. But the important thing about the shift this time is your data is moving out of your hands. And unfortunately, this means that the courts have said that when your data is in the hands of third parties, and this is an American thing, but it's happening in other countries too, you don't have this reasonable expectation of privacy. This is a legal term, which changes how things are protected. Now, if we move all our data to the cloud and lose that, what we're basically doing is this. We're erasing a right from the Bill of Rights. The Fourth Amendment, which is the one that protects security and privacy, no longer applies to data that's not in your house, in your possession. It's out in the hands of other people. So this is not something people think about. They don't realize as we re-architect our computers, we're rewriting the Bill of Rights. And that's a pretty dramatic thing. We've had a lot of changes, and we're not thinking about how it affects the balance. And I mostly just want to tell people, think about that. When you change where you keep your data, when you change how you architect your computer system, think about whether you could be doing something as dramatic as that. And I talked about this because what you end up doing is building the infrastructure of a police state. What the courts ruled was that once you had let someone else have your data, another company, you no longer could use the standard they use that you were keeping it private because you'd hand it off to someone else. It doesn't matter that you had to deal with them and so on. You'd handed it out to third parties, and now the government had a better chance to go in and get a subpoena for it or get a warrant for it and pull it out. And when it's in your house, the Fourth Amendment is very specific. It says that in the United States, the law is different in Canada, but it says people shall have the right to be secure in their persons, papers, and effects. And then, unfortunately, for now, we're trying to change their minds on this, treat it too literally. They really mean your persons, papers, and effects, not the server that Google owns where you stored something. Yeah?
You talked about webmail with this. Are you saying that if I had a mail server that was run on Exchange and I had Outlook and had a pop server and everything was on my actual hard drive, and it went through a server and I had to, does that still count, or is it webmail the storage in the cloud?
Well, so this actually is, so because the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply, we have what's called statutory, just laws that govern email. And email does have some specific laws, and those laws do differentiate between communications that are being sent, transmitted through, and what are called stored communications, which lose protection as time goes on. So after 6 months, they have a lower level protection. After a year, they have a different level of protection. That's different from, and it's just what Congress wrote. Okay, they just said, here are the protections on email. And that's good. There should be protections on email. Congress should write those. The piece of paper sitting in your house has something in the Bill of Rights that protects it, that Congress isn't allowed to change. It's in your house. They need a warrant, right? And that's very specific, unless it's a reasonable search. So there is some interpretation that goes on. He's wondering about if you have a backup stored remotely. Well, what I would advise, because I don't think you get as much legal protection for it, is, of course, to find a backup service that encrypts the backup on their server so that even they cannot get at it if they want to without your password. Now, this creates user interface problems. What if you forget your password? What are you going to do about it? And so on. And
so they give recovery password that they can use to recover your data without your password.
Yeah, he's pointing out that quite often you'll see people have all this security, and then they'll tell you your password if you can reveal your mother's maiden name, right? Which, of course, is not exactly hard for people to find out. This is how Sarah Palin, by the way. Do you remember Sarah Palin? Her email, someone accessed her email on Yahoo and published it, and there was a lot of brouhaha about it. So what that person did was, Sarah probably had, no, actually she's not that smart, but assumed she had a good, strong password for her email. But what she did was the guy answered the questions about, what's your mother's maiden name and what school did you go to? Well, if you're running for vice president, right, this is all known. As Ann Landers once said when someone asked, I'm thinking of researching my family history, what do you advise? She said, run for office. Luke.
So there's a similar, what seems to be a similar problem with DNA information. So if I post my genome online, it's not just my genome I'm posting online, but it's half of my father's genome, half of my mother's genome, etc.
And your brothers and sisters, yeah?
Yeah, half of my brothers and sisters on average. So the question is this more about property rights rather than ownership rights? So in other words, if it's on your property, then it's protected. But if you own it and it's not on your property, then you don't necessarily own it. Or what is?
Can I be your 23andMe friend? So the Fourth Amendment, as I said, it very specifically talks about the stuff that's in your house, and it's been extended to mean the stuff in your car and stuff like that. But yeah, the stuff that you put outside, now, this is again a special case where the law has things. Medical data has special rules in the law about how private it is, and those are controlled by Congress. So your question, unfortunately, isn't a general question. It's a very specific question, which I'm not an expert on all the HIPAA regulations, but I know they exist. So. And he was asking about his DNA data and how protected it would be.
There is a case where you encrypt something and you assume the company don't have access to it. But what I was referring as a recovery password is that some cryptographic systems allow the provider to have their own key to recover the data without my key.
Yeah.
And that's scary.
Yeah, he's worried about the fact that a lot of companies, they keep their own access to data that you thought was encrypted, that they have their own backdoors, their own keys, or ways to access your key. Basically, if you sign up to a website that is storing important data, there's two ways they'll help you deal with a lost password. One is they'll mail you the password, in which case run away, because it means they've got the password, they can access it at any time. The other one is they'll reset your password, which means they don't actually know your password. Hopefully it means they don't actually know your password, and so that without your password they cannot get at the data. But that's not a hard and fast rule, but it's a good way to bet. So I imagine, though, that when we build all this infrastructure and we put all our data out where it can be accessed by people and they have our passwords and all that, where everything is under control, it's kind of like putting a big button down at the government house which controls whether it's a police state or not. And I should put on this picture a do not push, right? Just to add to the thing. But that literally, whether you're in a police state or not, now is a question of policy, not implementation. This is something that I have to lie awake at night about. Because if you make it just a switch that they can throw, just type a command in the computer and suddenly all the traffic is watched, suddenly all the traffic is redirected. This is what happened in our case. We're suing AT&T. We were suing AT&T. Congress stopped us. We're now suing the NSA and the government because they wiretapped everybody after 9/11 and they didn't have warrants to do it. And they were able to do that because the infrastructure was already in place. They put a little tap on and they just had to throw a switch and say, okay, now we're looking at things. And I don't want to give the government that temptation, unfortunately. I think they should have to do it this way. This isn't a pretty picture, but this is how you used to have to take over a country. The old algorithm called tanks in the streets. All right? Don't you remember in the old days, whenever there was a coup, that first thing they did, they had to take over the radio station, and then they had to put tanks everywhere because physically, it's hard to do. You've got to have that level of physical control. We want to be worried if we build a system where you don't need to do a physical invasion to take over the infrastructure of a country, where you really can just change the policy bits in the routers. Yes, Shai? You're not shy. You see, you lied.
Just to make a counter-argument, not that they really necessarily buy it, but for the sake of argument, with modern technology, an individual has a greater and greater potential of causing harm. Right? If you wanted to kill 50 people 1,000 years ago, right? The 49, second in line, it's their fault because they have to run away. These days, you can, a few bits and you take an airplane into a building potentially. Right. So the state needs additional uses.
So Shai's worried about the fact that you can magnify your effects today with technology and do far more evil if you're one person than you used to be able to do, which I did talk about. And you're right, that's an unanswered question. It's I think one of the problems for groups like the students here at Singularity University. How do you design a world that is free, as well as a world that it cannot be, be taken over, but which stops the bad guys from doing it. And people debate that a lot. I mean, a lot of people think there's no real way to stop terrorism. They blow up planes, or they take over planes, and you stop them, then they're just going to blow up the trains in Madrid. If you can't blow up the trains in Madrid, they'll blow up the nightclubs in Bali. If they can't blow up the nightclubs in Bali, they'll walk into hotels in Mumbai and Indonesia again. Right? You can't stop them that way. You can't stop them with security. A lot of people think you have to find other ways. So I don't have the answer to that question. If I did, I'd be really important, and everyone would be giving me money. When 9/11 happened, one of the first things that was done was to strengthen the doors in the cockpits of aircraft, right, so that they could not be broken into by bad guys. So that improved the security of our air travel and didn't affect anyone's privacy at all. And I think that in many situations there is a metaphorical strong cockpit door. It's, it's the equivalent to that, a solution that if you look hard enough, you can find, which does increase our security, but doesn't have to take away our freedoms. Unfortunately, sometimes people take the easy route and they take away our freedoms. This is the perfect day to say that there are things that we should do, not because they're easy, but because they're hard. So, I mean, this isn't the 40th anniversary of that being said, but it's the 40th anniversary of it being realized. And it's one of my favorite quotes of John F. Kennedy. So I want to talk to you about, I'm told to be multidisciplinary and cross-track, so let's get into the artificial intelligence track and worry about the fact that AI is a tool of privacy invasion in particular. AI is able to do things like understand natural language documents in bulk. That's what they use when they put a wiretap on all the fiber going by. They have to have some level of basic intelligence to try and seed out the stuff that they're interested in from the large sea of data that's going by. They're starting to try to use face and person recognition. They're trying to use speech recognition and facial recognition, all of these AI technologies. And the trick is that AI allows surveillance to scale where it didn't before. In the past, surveillance didn't scale. It was hard work. You wanted to know what someone was doing, you had to put a tail on them, right, and follow them everywhere they went. And it took you had to have fixed cost for every person you put a tail on. You can't put a tail on 1 million people because you don't have 1 million spies to follow them. Now, one computer can follow 1 million people, and that changes the scaling and the nature of surveillance. So this brings me to my big fear, which is time-traveling robots from the future. Now, I'm actually not referring to the governor, although he did play a time-traveling robot from the future. And that is that AI is going to get better. In fact, some of you guys are even probably going to work on that. You're going to make AI better in the future. You're going to make face recognition be perfect. You're going to make speech recognition be perfect. You're going to make speaker recognition be perfect in a computer. Now, today, we can't do this face recognition, right? We can't have cameras that spot and name everybody who goes by. But we do have good recording, and recording is cheap. And so what that means is that you walked by an ATM today which has a camera that recorded the video of everyone who walked by the ATM. There's no software today that can go and find the faces of all those people. There will be, and the recordings will exist. So these time-traveling for robots from the future are not actually going to come into our time and invade us. But in the future, they're going to know everything we did today. We have to worry, and this is a very hard thing to worry about, but it's the job of a thing like Singularity University in many ways. To worry about what technologies in the future, how they might even affect what you're doing today. There are going to be sins in the future that are not sins today. Right? There are things that you are doing wrong right now that you have no idea. People are going to go, oh my God, you did that? When 15 years from now. And the computers of the future will be able to reach in and find that you did that. People will be able to ask that question, are you now or have you ever been? Whatever it is that you have ever been or are you now. And they'll be able to know by scanning the past. So today we try and keep a little private what we think will hurt us, but we don't keep private what we don't know is going to hurt us. There were times Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. He was not ashamed of it. Today we think very badly of him for having done that. There are going to be things that get more permissive and things that get less permissive as time goes on. Plus, all this technology we build and those switches on the wall that I showed you, they get deployed everywhere in the world. Imagine for a moment that Facebook had existed 10 years ago when Falun Gong was around. It's still legal in China, and they'd all joined it and thought it was really cool. And then the Chinese had said, okay, let's round up everyone in Falun Gong. Well, it would have been right there. Everything, all their connections, you would have been able to find everybody. It would have been very easy task when around it. This is going to happen someday in the future. It didn't happen then because they're an organization from before the Facebook era. But in the future, some government somewhere in the world, less enlightened than perhaps the one you live under, is going to use these technologies, these social networks, in order to round up all the usual suspects. And that makes me worry about it. I tell stories from the past, of course. Everyone knows, most people should know, how the record-keeping about who was Jewish was used in a number of countries when the Nazis moved in. I've just ended the thread in some people's because I've compared things to Hitler now. But it is a real example from history where primitive forms of surveillance and record-keeping technology had very, very negative consequences. And no matter how cool it is on Facebook to throw sheep at your friends, is it worth that happening? That's a difficult question. And it's not a question we ask a lot. So anyway, the balance is changing. Now, what I want to do, I don't know if I want to cover this because I know we're getting short. I'm just going to give you some examples about how hard these problems are to solve, because there's some counterintuitive things. I like to tell people that ease of use can be a bug, and because computer designers are quite upset at hearing that concept. Here's something with great ease of use, this little stripe on the back of my driver's license. It makes it really easy for me to give someone all the data on that. That doesn't enhance my privacy in any way. If you make something easy to do, you make it easy to ask for. You make it easy to demand. Why won't you let me swipe your driver's license? It's so, and you go into bars and they swipe your driver's license when all they really need is one bit. Are you 21 or not? That's all they really need to know, but they'll collect everything. You make something easy to do, you actually make it happen more often. That's kind of obvious. And if what you make happen more often is something with bad consequences, it's something to think about. It used to be you had to join a website, you had to have a long form and fill in everything, and they didn't have the guts to ask you everything because you wouldn't join the website. Now, on Facebook, if someone wants to throw a sheep at you or other application, it says just join this application. Tell it everything about yourself and all your friends. It's one click, and people do. They do it by the billions. People think that giving the end user control, having a little button to say, no, I don't want to use that application, is enough of a way to help them protect their privacy. But it doesn't, because you don't get to negotiate these agreements. Negotiation only happens between two parties with relatively equal strength, or some amount of strength back and forth with each other. All these contracts you're all clicking, how many of you read all the contracts that you click I agree on when you install software or read websites? Yeah, okay, there's one asshole there who thinks that he does. You don't read them all, do you really?
No.
Okay. You're not really an asshole, but nonetheless, that's what you're doing. But because you can't negotiate these contracts, right? There's no way for you to say, I don't like that clause. I don't like offering my firstborn or giving up my right to reverse engineer. So we haven't had much success. And oddly enough, Microsoft with its passport could have done better. That we end up with a world where today we sort of let the tinfoil hat people like me have our way and say no occasionally. But in the future, once the market power is strong, they won't be able to do that. And you'll just have to go away. Once you export data, it's lost. The Europeans think that they can make a big regime of privacy regulations that will basically register every database and control what goes where. But it doesn't stop data from being repurposed. We're very rare to see big collections of data going out that someone doesn't come up with a clever or new purpose for it and a reason why that the old rules. And now I actually consulted with 23andMe a bit on their stuff. They didn't do everything I said though, so I'm certainly not going to say that I approve everything that's in their policies. They're trying somewhat harder than most people, but I still worry that someday someone will come up with some reason for why the data should have another purpose. Abuse and some more future issues. For example, as I make this joke, right? Why do we have to worry about all this? It's not like they would put wiretaps on everybody without getting warrants, right? At least we can trust our government not to do that. But in fact, you may not know about a program called Echelon. How many of you have heard of Echelon? Well, you're an informed group. Right? A cooperative group between all the major signals intelligence spy agencies in the world is illegal for the NSA. It was until George Bush's program. But it's illegal for the NSA to spy on Americans. And it's illegal for MI6 to spy on British. And it's illegal for the Canadian DCE to spy on Canadians. But what the NSA does, it calls the Canadian DCE and says, hey, Canadian friends, we would never ask you to spy on Americans, even though it's legal for you to spy on Americans. But if you found something, here's $1 billion, by the way. But you'd tell your friends if you found something about Americans that was interesting. Now, they can't spy on Americans, but the Canadian Spy Agency can. And the Canadian Spy Agency can take a large gift from the United States and can report what it finds. And these deals go back and forth. They find ways around the rules. Nanotech, wonderful, great stuff. I'm on the board of Foresight Nanotech Institute, which is a futurist organization that Ralph's involved in, and you've met some of the other people from there. We love our nanotech, but it's building other things that are nasty, like chemical sensors, tiny chemical sensors, drug sensors, DNA sensors that we're going to get super, super cheap. It's building cheap electronic sensors. Cameras are going to cost 22 cents, and they're well, there are limits for diffraction on lens size today, but there are even some people who think there are ways around that. RFID tags, you've been getting some training about those? Little tiny tags can respond to radio signals, which are going to be put maybe in your wallet and your clothes and everything you buy so that a sensor can detect who you are. They're already mandated in passports, new passports that are being issued in all the countries around the world. Imagine someone saying, you know, we should have drug testing 24/7. Right? You work for a government lab or something like that. There should be something in your toilet that betrays you. Every time you pee, right? It says, oh, look, he's got some residue from a drug he wasn't supposed to be taking. We'll have to raise his health insurance prices and fire him. And you know, these cameras are going to be so cheap, so ubiquitous, and you can't stop your neighbor from having a camera on his own property. So soon there might be a camera on everyone's property watching everywhere in the world. I mean, even without the government being involved at all. So then they're going to do these technologies for plain old-fashioned espionage. And then eventually, people with nanotech want to build things like smart dust, you know, literally sensors that are the size of dust and insects that can fly in, that can do mesh networking using ultra-wideband because you can use the very short pulses in very small devices that wasn't physically possible to do before. Artificial insects, ability to focus light without lenses. Some of these things are coming up and will change the nature of surveillance as well. So where are people going in the future with? Some people just think we should say privacy is dead, get over it. That's a quote from Scott McNealy, who was CEO of Sun Microsystems, which I did not work at. By the way, that was something else. Some people think European privacy laws are the example. Some people think that children will just get used to it because they're raised in a completely different climate of no privacy. David Brin is a writer, a science fiction writer, who's written a very interesting book some years ago called The Transparent Society, where he basically makes the conclusion that these sensors are all coming, there's nothing we can do about it, so let's make the best of it and try and watch what the government does with them. You'll have to read his book to get a real sense of his argument. I have arguments with it. In fact, in a debate with him, I made this slide to show what the transparent society is. This is Guantanamo. You know, the idea of living. Lady Diana's brother, the Earl of Spencer, said, privacy is what they take away from you when they want to torture you. This is an example of that. So these are some threats. So well, I've got a lot more stuff. I want you to come back with me with some more questions before we almost run out of time here. Although I know you'll let me go over like all the other speakers so that you're here all day because you love your Saturdays here. Yeah, Rich.
Every time there's a privacy thing the government's doing, there'll be some kind of counter method evolved either on the web or as a company. There's a big business there. But also, what's your comment, like at one point, when you encrypted your disks, and you couldn't decrypt it for law enforcement agency, they could arrest you for that. I don't know if that's changed or not.
So he's asking, first of all, will the public make countermeasures to fight privacy? And they do. There is a lot of merit to that. But I don't know if it's a war we want to be into. I love to give the example of Colditz Prison, where the prisoners in a Nazi prison camp, which is, you'd think, a fairly low privacy environment, built an airplane. Right, without the guards knowing them. So, I mean, yeah, people do have remarkable abilities to get around things. Your second question, though, is whether they can enforce you to... that gets debated back and forth a lot, and there have been cases where they have forced people to do it, particularly at the border. So they've been saying you have no rights at the border. When you cross the border, they can take your laptop and copy the disk, and they don't need to have suspicion of a crime the way they would if they want to do that. Someone's phone is ringing. No, I know what the signal is. So that one's still being debated is the short answer to your question. Some more questions? Let me see if there was any other big topic I had on the slides.
Yeah, so you've listed in the previous slide a bunch of ways in which privacy will end up. Where do you think it's going to end up?
So I don't know where it's going to end up. The solution, I think, is the only one that I can see working is actually plain old social convention. And I use the example of Japanese society. In Japan, they had to live in very close quarters with paper walls in between them and very little privacy, and they adopted social conventions that said, you know, if you were to repeat something you heard through the paper wall, this was just a horrible faux pas. Well, I don't know what Japanese for faux pas is. What's French for faux pas? And actually, it probably isn't faux pas, you know, and I think about it. But anyway, or actually, no, so that's one example of how people found a solution to that problem, but I am a little bit scared but still optimistic at our creativity in finding solutions like that. So now I have to dish Ralph, because Ralph's solution, is Ralph, are you here? Okay, good. Ralph's solution, believe it or not, is he thinks that to your problem, is that he thinks the only answer is that we're going to have to use this nanotech sensor ability to stop people from building bad nanotech, that will actually have to, have sensors that look and see people trying to build self-replicating dangerous nanotech, build dangerous biological agents, and be watching everyone to stop them from doing these things. He thinks those things are so dangerous that this is necessary. So I came up with the name for Ralph's watching nanotech. I called it red, white, and blue goo. So if you've been introduced to the gray goos and the green goos and all these other goos, red, white, and blue goo is goo that enforces American ideals on the rest of the world. Whoever's, but Ralph's cool with the red, white, and blue goo. Some people go further. So we'll just have to rewire people's brains so they're just not predisposed to violence. Literally, I see people suggest this, and of course it has occurred in science fiction novels. So some of the suggestions about where to go in the future, when, as you said, there is such a radical power ability in the hands of the small person who is crazy and wants the world to end and doesn't care if they die in the process. Some people think that we will find ourselves forced into solutions like that. I certainly hope that that's not where we go. All right, well, yeah. So I'm going to close with the slogan from the New Hampshire license plate and hope that some people still believe in it. So thanks.